The New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to The New Norm. Just yesterday, I had an opportunity to speak at a church here in West Michigan, and they were doing a series on parenting. And so I got an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite passages about challenges that parents face. Now, Kelly and I have 4 kids. They are 20, 18, 15, 13, and I will never forget when we brought the first one home for the first time. And we're just going to the walls trying to make sure that she was protected in every possible way. You know, you've got the outlet covers, you've got the cabinet locks, you've got the child-proof medicine caps. Everything in your life is oriented around your child's safety. And I think sometimes our standards might get a little bit lax as our kids get older. I remember hearing Kelly tell me that when our youngest was home with her, the other ones were at school, she was trying to plug an iPad into the wall in another room. And this was back in the day where the iPad prong, the part of the charger that actually goes into the device, was really wide. And so our youngest, Miriam, actually had the charger prongs into the wall, but the charger wasn't pressed flush with the wall. So there's a little bit of a gap, and she didn't exactly know where to plug the other end in. So instead of plugging it into the device, she just plugged them into the prongs that were already into the wall. Kelly was in the other room, and she heard Miriam scream, "Fireballs! Fireballs!" And she walked in there, and to her horror, sure enough, there's a scorch mark on the wall and a little bit of soot on her fingers. She was fine, but it's never the yell that you want to hear from the other room from your kids. And it's just a reminder to us that you do everything that you can to protect your kids, but eventually they get to a point in life where you can't protect them from the universe, and you certainly can't protect them from themselves. And there's a great story in the Bible about a parent's heart who is breaking because their child is in crisis. And we read this story in Genesis chapter 1. A little bit of backstory. About 3,000 years ago, God promised Abraham and Sarah that they would have a son. But after waiting for more than a decade, they're still childless. So Sarah says to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Sarah's going to be the architect of her own family. She doesn't care who she has to run over to get what she wants. She is saying, God cannot be trusted. I need to take matters into my own hands. So she puts Abraham in an impossible situation. She says, "I want you to sleep with my Egyptian slave, this young woman who has no family and is totally dependent on Sarah for her survival." And now Sarah is demanding that Hagar sleep with her 86-year-old husband. Hagar is being forced into an encounter that she doesn't want for a master that she doesn't trust to bear a child she doesn't get to keep. And when Hagar finally conceives, she taunts Sarah because now she's got some leverage in the relationship now. Sarah blames Abraham for this problem, even though it's one of Sarah's creation. And Sarah abuses Hagar. So Hagar runs away, and an angel tells her to go back home. She does, and gives birth to a son, Ishmael. About 14 years later, when Abraham is 100 and Sarah is 90, they miraculously give birth to a son, Isaac. And this is where we pick up the story. Genesis 21 says, "The child, Isaac, grew and was weaned, and on the day he was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, 'Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac.' The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son, Ishmael. But God said to him, 'Do not be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to what Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring or your legacy will be reckoned. I will make Ishmael into a nation also, because he's your son.' And early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. And he set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. And she went on her way and wandered into the desert of Beersheba. And when the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. And then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away. And she thought, 'I cannot watch the boy die.' And as she sat there, she began to sob." The text continues, "God heard the boy crying, and the angel of the Lord called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, 'What's the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up, take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation.'" That's the line that jumps out to me. God heard the boy crying. And then the text says this: Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave it to the boy to drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. And while he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. I love this part of the text that says that God opened her eyes to a life-giving resource. He revealed a well that was already there. God doesn't send a supernatural rainstorm. God doesn't send a drone with a hydro flask. God allows Hagar to see something that she could not see before. And then it says that God walked with Ishmael as he grew up. It says he lived in the desert and became an archer. And I love this part about the story because it says that God is filling in the gaps for Hagar, a single mom who is raising a child in the desert that Hagar can't fill. He became an archer, which allows him to do two things. One, get food from the family, and two, defend he and his mom from an attack. So the question is this, is if he became an archer in the desert, who helped him become that? Well, I think God did. So then the question is, what are the lessons for those of us who are in crisis? I think Hagar's story gives us 5 prayers to pray for our families. The first one is this: God, hear. God, will you hear our weeping? Will you see our pain? I've been reading through the book of Exodus lately, and in Exodus chapter 3, it says that God says about the people of Israel who are trapped in slavery, he says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people. I have heard them crying out, and I am concerned about their suffering. So know this, no matter what heartache your child is facing, whether they're 6 or 16 or 36, God sees them and hears them and knows them and is concerned about their hurt. And then the second prayer is, God, speak. God, will you speak encouragement? Will you speak wisdom? Will you speak promise and hope to us? Last week I was reading through the Psalms, and Psalm 23 says, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. And maybe what you need to be reminded of in this season is that God is providing for you, and God will continue to provide for you. The third prayer is, God, open. God, will you open my eyes so that I can see what I can't see on my own? Will you remind me that you have already answered our prayer in a way that is good for us, even if we don't see it yet? You've already provided resources, whether that's people or finances or counselors, to help us get over this hump. The next prayer is, God, walk. God, will you walk with each of my kids through their respective deserts, whether it's a desert of loneliness or a desert of confusion or a desert of discernment or a desert of academic challenges, whatever it is that they're going through, will you walk with them through that? The text doesn't say anything about Ishmael's spiritual life, but it does say that God was with him in his formative teenage years. And then the last prayer is this: God, shape. God, will you shape my son or shape my daughter or shape another person that I care about into the person that you want them to become, the person that they can only become in and through you? And will you give me the grace to hold my dreams, my plans, my hopes, my expectations for them with open hands, believing that your will, your desires, your blueprint for their life is better than anything that I could ever imagine. So if you've got an Ishmael who's struggling in your life these days, I want you to take heart, and I want you to pray the kind of prayers that Hagar did, believing that God sees you, that God's with you, and that God's for you. The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, families, and businesses stronger through counseling and coaching. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.